great to have you here. Indeed, we may have a big welcoming applause. Mr. Röller, I just in the introduction of the session already described how, on the one hand, we see this high potential for the mobilization of private investments through green guarantees. And I mean, even though guarantees are not a new concept, green guarantees still, unfortunately, remain a little bit underutilized. And from that perspective, against that backdrop, could you tell us more about what the idea then is of the green guarantee group from you guys specifically?
Yeah, the idea is exactly what you said. I think really to solve the problem of climate neutrality, you need private investment. And we've been looking at this for many, many years. And the initiative, which is by the German government, and I'm very happy to chair that, together with Morgan at the European Climate Foundation, is to take a hard look at have guarantees really been used efficiently or not. Guarantees are very useful because the leveraging factor is very high, so you de-risk investment in developing countries, and also in times of scarce public resources. Yeah. Even though in Germany we may have a little bit more money, depending on how the vote today goes, guarantees are actually relatively a good way of, from the budget point of view. So the idea was to create this initiative with making some proposals and making these guarantees more efficient.
Yeah, and I mean, you explained to some extent, right? It helps with the leverage. It helps to de-risk investments, which is sort of like the sort of mechanism behind it that makes it such an effective tool in accelerating and increasing private investments. But could you just elaborate a little bit more on your guys' role from the Green Guarantee Group? How do you contribute to this increasing of private investments through in the green transformation altogether?
We have about 200 experts from around the world, from the private sector and the public sector. We have a wise person group, which we are preparing right now.
A wise person group?
A wise person group.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
It's an expert panel.
You want to be?
I want to be on there. Who doesn't want to be part of a wise person's group?
That's an expert panel, and we'll be having our sort of areas for improvement ready by the World Bank IMF meetings in April in Washington. And we've been looking at areas such as local markets, local capital markets, which has been repetitively mentioned as a big issue. How can you better develop? Then also, what's the role of the MDBs? We're talking about the pricing of risk and how that can be done better. There's a lot of data issues. And finally, also pooling, local pools of working together in the developing countries. Those are the three areas, and we'll be presenting our ideas next month.
Oh, that's amazing to hear. Also something to look forward to beyond BETD then. Hey, and Mr. Röller, when you say that, because you mentioned local markets, and I would suggest maybe we can zoom in on that a little bit more. Could you tell us a bit more how guarantees then specifically and very concretely, when we look at local markets, sort of enhance investment opportunities right there?
Well, we will make more practical suggestions next month, but I think one example is if sort of money goes locally and gets to local banks, how can we empower local banks to actually give guarantees and that the money stays in the country? So I think the ecosystem, there's a lot of discussion on that here as well, is very important. And what is the role of the MDBs and the national development banks, and how we can make that forward is an important one. Also coordinating. There are many actors in certain countries, so I think coordinating devices. But the basic idea is to empower and to develop the local financial markets, currency risk, exchange rate risks. We need to get that right, I think, to develop that market and to move those countries towards climate neutrality.
Yeah, I love how you say that. Yet, at the same time, there's always this issue, right? I mean, we are inherently risk-averse as human beings, and we have translated that in the systems that we've built in the course of human history and our financial systems too. And, we try to mitigate that all around. You guys play into that very smart by giving these green guarantees. At the same time, when we look at investors and banks, they always want information and data to sort of like also de-risk investments and sort of, make those assessments. There are a lot of people that also say, when we look at green guarantees, a big issue that we still have is the lack of data and information to sort of scale that up. How do you look at that specifically? What steps can we sort of take to improve data availability to actually ensure that we can scale up?
Well, that's another area which we've been talking to a lot of people about. There is a database called GEM that the IFC is doing, and I think this is a very good first step, which looks at default rates and recovery rates. And we'll be having some suggestions of how to expand on that and also include the instrument of guarantees more into the data availability. Because if you don't have the data, you don't have the methodology. We had a session on that earlier, how to price risk fairly, and there's a big debate as to whether that's done fairly or not for these developing countries. We are going to say more transparency, more data, and working also with the private sector to some extent. This is something which we're going to propose. I forgot to mention one, if you allow me, one important thing. This is initially a German initiative, and we're about to move it forward through this year, and the idea is to move it into the COP30 and the G20. The G20 is a lot about cost of capital. South Africa is the presidency this year, so we think our initiative can feed in very well into that. My point is that we're very happy today actually announced that, or tomorrow morning, that the GGG is now going to be 2 countries, not only Germany, but a second country, Nigeria. I'm very happy to have Nigerian representatives here today, and Farouk is the co-chair as of this week. So we'll have Germany and a country from the Global South, a pretty important one, both pushing this forward as we move towards COP30 on climate finance.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's an incredible addition for sure to have there. And I love it taps into sort of, I mean, we all know that we need to raise as fast as we can with the scaling up of these initiatives, right? We know that funding and financing is a big bottleneck for many people. So how important would you say that international cooperation in that sense is?
I think it's very important. I mean, I did the 10 years, the G20. There's some other people here who negotiated it. I think we've always talked about coordinating between the development agencies in terms of attracting private investment, also having, if I may say so, attractive European offers, Western offers for these countries. Because they're not in a very comfortable position sometimes. They go for a solution which actually is not something which shares our values to some extent. So I think this international cooperation on those things are very important. We'll be making suggestions as we go through the year on that as well.
Yeah, for sure, indeed. And you mentioned COP30 being an interesting sort of like metric point where we can sort of see and hear more next month. You'll be launching more the G20, so those are for sure things to look forward to. Mr. Röller, if I can sort of take it back a little bit. In the introduction, you know, and that is something that still baffles me, is we have all these great initiatives and ideas out there, and clearly everything has their sort of like bottlenecks to scale up. But then when I look at green guarantees, I'm also thinking, what would you say is the most important thing? And we have multiple stakeholders in the room. We have people from government, private sector, investors. What concrete steps would you say should be taken to ensure that green guarantees sort of move from being a niche solution to being a mainstream tool that is used overall?
Well, I should say that, you know, if you look at it, and I learned a lot about guarantees, it's not really a niche solution. I think it's already pretty big one. Even you look at the German government is very big into the insurance system and guarantees and all kinds of things.
Then let me rephrase, in developing countries we still see that it's underutilized.
It's underutilized, and I think we should do more, and I think this localized, developing local markets, I would say, is probably one of the most important things. There are also regulatory issues which are very tricky, which we may look into. But we still need to agree on that in the group, and we need to agree on the vice person group, and we'll have more concrete steps. I want to have 4 or 5 political recommendations. I think there's a lot of technical stuff which is there, obviously. It's a rather technical field. You know, pricing of risk is not an easy thing.
Fair pricing, you mentioned.
A fair thing. But I think we should have 4 or 5 political suggestions, and then rather go through the COP and the G20 and have that ready as we go through the year. So give me a little bit of time. Also need to get agreement in the group, which is not that easy.
I can imagine, indeed.
But I think the 3 areas I mentioned, I think is all I want to say today.
No, I really like that. So, I mean, it keeps it a little bit suspenseful for us as well to follow the trajectory of your work, I would say. Now, let me then end with this, because I'm really curious to hear from you. Looking forward, what would you say, where do you hope this sort of ends? Because you already mentioned, you know, looking ahead at COP30 in Brazil, the things that you're hoping for. But what sort of impact can we ideally expect from the Green Guarantee Group when it comes to making an impact on the political agendas also that we see?
Well, I have been, as I told you, I've been in G20 many years. I've been for the first time in COP, and it was all about climate finance. And if you think about what can be achieved this year, also with the way the world is going, by the way, where multilateral work is becoming, in some sense, changing dramatically from the times I was involved in it 10 years, that I think for private investment in climate finance and maybe SDG goals, I think this is something where we could make some progress this year. So I'm very hopeful that this applies also to the G20, but the COP, that this is something which we will move forward. And I think it also relates, and we're having a debate also in Germany on that, as we are having a vote today in terms of budget issues and a new German government, is how we spend our money. And I think if you think about the geopolitical situation, you think about the external dimension in the world, you think about climate, but also economic issues, I think this is an initiative which could make a small contribution, and I'm dead set, I'm very willing to help. I think the other thing I should mention to qualify, private investment is something which is much broader than just guarantees. I should have said that in the beginning. There's carbon markets, there's all kinds of issues which attract investment. Yeah. But I think guarantees is an instrument which I think is an important part of it.
Yeah, a vital part in that sense. And I do think it's very important how you mention the geopolitical trends that we see, right? In the very first session today, we were also thinking about, the targets that we have are inherently ambitious already, but then we see forces in the world, like the US, retreating from the climate agreement, and then I think that sort of underlines the urgency of us to scale up all the work that's out there already.
Yeah, I think that if you think about, the debate right now about geopolitics and also the necessity for security, if I may say so, from the sidelines, I think climate issues are fundamental in all of that. So I think, without solving that problem, we're going to have a lot harder time in the other one. Last remark also is that I think that climate finance is important in terms of alliances around the world. I think we should be open, if I may say so, towards having alliances with all countries around the world, particularly in this area of climate. Right. And I think this is also an answer to diversifying risk and to make sure that we are, if I may speak as a European here for a second, the GGG is not a European initiative, it's a global initiative. But I think this is something where climate can actually be a hope and an anchor to move the world forward in an important dimension.
Yeah, I love how you say that. So it is about this sense of, you're saying climate finance, it can build alliances around the world because it brings us closer together. I think it's an element of that. And again, climate is more than just climate finance, and climate finance is more than just guarantees. Exactly. But you need to do your part in some area. And I think the initiative by Jennifer Morgan, who's also here, and also the economics ministry of pushing guarantees in this spectrum is maybe now more needed than before. Yeah. And therefore, I think this is, as you say, I think it's a way to actually build alliances. And we need to do that, if you ask me, as we move towards COP. Yeah, for sure. And I love how you said that, this sense of security, which we're all sort of like keeping our eyes open on in the world right now. Let's not forget how fundamental climate is to that, because that can also unite us together. And if I may say another story, I want to take up too much of it. In 2017, Germany had the G20 presidency. Mr. Sach knows this very well. He was negotiating the climate with Jochen Flassbart. We had Donald Trump's administration for the first time in 2017. I was a Sherpa organizing it for Germany. And we didn't know what to do on climate. He just left the Paris Agreement actually a few weeks after the G20 summit in July 17. And what we did was, I think, very innovative. It's just an example. In the text, we negotiated 2 paragraphs, one with 19 exclamation point, 19. We kept the world together on Paris, on NDCs, and all the other things. And one was a paragraph which was the United States. At the time, everybody thought it was the end of the G20 because there was a split. Now it's much worse, by the way, on other issues, Ukraine and other things. But at the time, I thought it was a great success to build alliances, at least among, if you want, coalition of the willing, it was 19,
on the issue of climate. And I think the world is moving in that direction. We need to actively work on these alliances, and I think climate finance is part of that.
Yeah.
I think you need to go on now.
I mean, I'm also looking at the faces and everyone's hanging from your lips, so I think it's interesting and fascinating enough to hear about it. And I do love how you say it, because I think, and if I may speak for the room, but otherwise people interrupt me and say that's not true, but I think we're all sort of seeking, what are like things and attitudes that we should have to all these volatile like things that we see happening in the world. It's very unstable. There's a lot to do with the insecurity on safety even, but then also these sort of like such systemic issues that we need to overcome. What do we do, and how do we sort of like still move on with those super long-term agendas that we need to have? And I love how you say keep on doing the work, finding a coalition of the willing, if you will, and not stopping, because we really can also not afford to do that. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. That's all I wanted. Is that enough to suffice for your wisdom group of people now?
I think that was my message.
Yeah, honestly, thank you so much. Maybe we have a big round of applause, everyone, for Mr. Röller. Thank you so much. Thank you. It was lovely to have you.